Don't be turned off when I say this, but notes of tar or leather. Like think of a freshly paved road. They just repaved all of the roads here in my neighborhood over the last couple months. And I literally was like, I love that smell. Well, hello. Welcome to Sip with Nikki. I am your host, Nikki Lamberti. If you are a faithful listener, welcome back. I see you and I appreciate you. And for all my newbies, hey, so glad you're here. Thanks for joining the party. Hey, speaking of faithful listeners, have you left us a review yet? I want to take a real quick minute and just ask you to do a favor for the podcast. If you're an Apple or Spotify listener, there's a place to leave a star rating and a review. It takes less than a minute. And if you're listening in YouTube, which has been really growing of late, which is very fun to see, just give us a like, a thumbs up, and a subscribe. All of these things help this podcast to be more visible and get more listeners. And hey, the bigger the party, the better. So this week, I'm talking about one of my favorite types of wine to drink, and I feel like many people are not familiar with it. So I am shouting out the secret of Grenache today. What is it? Where can you find it? Why should you be drinking it? Food and wine pairings that go well with it. And then I'm going to be sharing with you some of my favorites that I drink on a regular basis across all different price points. So are you ready to learn more about this delicious, lesser-known grape, Grenache? Let's do it. So later this afternoon, Michael and I are heading to downtown Napa to a wine club party for T-Vine Winery, just the letter T, T-Vine. And it's a wine club that I've been in for quite some time. And one of the things that I love about their portfolio is their Grenache. And we've always drank their Grenache, but we recently had some friends over for dinner, and Michael was cooking his famous smash burgers and twice fried French fries watching the football game. I won't say who he was rooting for because I don't want to lose listeners. And our friends were like, oh, Grenache, we're like just recently hearing about this. And we served them the T-Vine Grenache. They were really wowed by it and how well it went with the food spread that we had for the night. And so it got me thinking that we know Grenache, it's on our radar. I don't think a lot of you know it. So I wanted to give you some quick facts about it to help you understand it, learn a little more about it, and then give you recommendations of some of my favorites. What's interesting is that so many wine drinkers are not really familiar with it, and yet Grenache is one of the world's most widely planted red grapes, from Spain, where it's originally from, and where it's referred to as Garnacha, to France, to Australia, and of course here in California. There's a lot of Grenache acreage on this planet, yet historically it was used as a blending grape. A very famous region that uses Grenache as a blending grape is Châteauneuf-du-Pape. Ooh, say it again, Châteauneuf-du-Pape. When I was getting my wine certification and years ago learning about the different regions, that was always a fun one to say. Châteauneuf-du-Pape in France. If you've ever heard of people refer to a wine as a GSM blend, the Grenache is the G. So in Châteauneuf-du-Pape region of France, they often blend Grenache, Syrah, and Mourvèdre, 3 different grapes, and we call it affectionately a GSM. So Grenache is the G. And the cool thing about this grape is that you'll see it in its red form. We drink a lot of that. It also can be Grenache Blanc, right? So there is a white version of it. And one of my favorite types of rosés to drink is rosé of Grenache. If you go back a couple episodes to the Rosé All Day, you will hear a little bit more about how rosé is made and the different kinds and some of my favorites, and I talk a little bit about it there. But it's very cool that this grape can really be drank in all 3 forms, from red to white to rosé. And one of the things that I've always loved about Grenache, this is not going to be a surprise to you at all if you know me or have been listening to some of these podcasts. We in this household and in our circle of friends here living in Sonoma County, we are all about the food and the wine together. And what we love about Grenache is that it's really versatile. So first, let's talk about why. What makes a wine versatile as far as pairing with food? So first of all, it does not have a lot of tannin. Tannin, of course, coming from the skin of the grape, giving you sort of the dry, chalky astringency. Think Cabernet Sauvignon. That's one of the more tannic grapes. Grenache is definitely a lot lower tannin than that. On a scale of low to high tannin, I'm going to put most Grenache just right in the middle. So right away, it just makes it a little more accessible, a little bit more approachable, a little bit more drinkable. Doesn't need food, but when it comes to pairing with food, the fact that it has low tannin just increases the spectrum of the types of things it can pair with. In the glass, the color's fairly light, so it's not unlike Pinot Noir. If you're familiar with that, it can be very sort of ruby pink in the glass, depending on where it's from. So even as a red wine, it literally looks lighter in the glass, almost to the point where you might be able to see through it in the glass, like a Pinot Noir. But the acidity, right, lip-smacking freshness that I always talk about pairing with food is definitely a little bit on the higher side. It's got that brightness to it, which really makes it a great pairing with rich foods like stewed meats and pizza and smash burgers. But it has a medium body, so different than Pinot Noir. It's a little bit heavier and richer in the mouth. Not heavy in flavor, but heavy in body. Remember, when we talk about body in wine, think of the milk scale. Skim, 1%, 2%, whole, half and half cream. I don't know where the oats and the almond milks go in there. I'm sticking to the cow milk for this analogy. But obviously, you can think about how different a skim milk weight, viscosity, body feels in your mouth than a whole milk or a half and half, right? So Grenache is kind of in the medium plus body. I would put Grenache like almost 2%. So it has just a nice, rich, velvety mouth coating texture without being too bold and having too many tannins. And then very often, the notes that you will get out of Grenache are very berry and very cherry, right? Red fruits, bright fruits like cherry and strawberry. There's also a very specific note that I sometimes find in Grenache. I find it in the tea vine Grenache, and I love it probably because it's nostalgic, and it's almost like grape soda. I think of that purple can of Welch's grape soda growing up, and Grenache will sometimes have that note for me. But here's what's so interesting and pleasing about it. It's not just fruity, fruity, fruity in the glass. Then there's another layer of sort of earthy, spicy, dried herbs, a lavender. Sometimes there's even citrusy notes like blood orange or orange. And then one of the things I love, and it's subtle, and if you have not thought about this, don't be turned off when I say this, but notes of tar or leather. Like think of a freshly paved road. They just repaved all of the roads here in my neighborhood over the last couple months. And I literally was like, I love that smell. And of course, who doesn't love the smell of leather, right? So what about a little hint of that, underneath that bright cherry or grape soda note? I call it tar and cherries. Really fun way to think about the flavor profile and the aromatics of Grenache. And now a word from our sponsor. I got an olive tree for my birthday. How cool is that? Our sponsor, American Olive Farmer, which is based just a couple hours north of me in Corning, California, has such a beautiful lineup of olives, olive trees, olive oil, and all different products, and I'm so excited to share it with you. If you listened to episode 25 and 26 in season 1, you heard me interview Liz Tagami. She and her husband Donald have a small business growing and making beautiful olive oils and importing delicious vinegars. They have a great newsletter with recipes, and I have my eye on the heirloom tomato and pesto tart recipe right now because our end of summer garden is exploding with tomatoes. I can't wait to try that and maybe drizzle it with a little of their arbuckine Argentina or Ascalano olive oil. My mouth is watering. Do you know if you've ever thought about brining your own olives at home? That's also something they can help you with. You can actually purchase raw olives from American Olive Farmer right now, because about 6 weeks before they harvest for olive oil, the canneries who make America's pizza olives and stuffed olives, like my favorite jalapeno blue cheese stuffed olives, they harvest earlier for those jarred olive varieties. And just like with wine grapes, there's a wide range of olive varieties, and some are better suited for brining than others. So Sevillano and Manzanillo are two varieties that are great for brining, and you can buy them in 10-pound or even 20-pound boxes. Go for it. An American Olive Farmer will ship them right to your door with a full PDF recipe and guidebook on what to do with them. Now, the fully green early crop is sold out, but they're still taking orders at the time of this recording for mid-harvest olives, which just have a little bit more color to them. So make sure you visit AmericanOliveFarmer.com and use the code SIPWithNikki, capital S, capital W, and capital N, SIPWithNikki for $10 off your order. Check out the link in the show notes for more information. Go see what it's all about. You're welcome. And now, back to our show. Now, I mentioned Châteauneuf-du-Pape earlier again. I know you just wanted me to say it again. I know. And when Grenache is part of the blend with Syrah and Mourvèdre, generally that's going to be a little bit of a richer, darker style, especially depending on how much Syrah is in that blend. Syrah has a richness to it and a savoriness to it. Mourvèdre, which is a lesser known grape, almost has a meatiness to it. So the descriptions that I just gave are generally going to be for a wine that's 100% Grenache or very Grenache driven, whereas a GSM is going to be all of that gorgeousness, but just in a richer expression because of those other two grapes bringing that to the party. So now it's time for our Sip Spotlight. Sip Spotlight. So I've already mentioned T-Vine, which is located here in Napa Valley, and specifically the Frediani vineyard that they make most of their Grenache from is in Calistoga, which is about 10 minutes from where I'm sitting. And this is definitely by far, hands down, my favorite Grenache. And it's around the $50 price point. So it's a special premium wine. And I'm going to put the link in the show notes for all three of our Sip Spotlights today. But this wine is pretty much what inspired this whole episode. And also, it's what has inspired Michael and I to add Grenache to our wine label, Solavato. We've got 3 barrels of Grenache from last year's harvest, 2023, that we'll be bottling next year. And it's from the Dry Creek Valley region here in Sonoma County. And I just tasted it out of the barrel earlier this week, and it's delicious. And I can't wait for you to try it, but that's not till next year. So in the meantime, I want to spread the love to some of my other favorite Grenache producers, both here in California and also one in Spain. So T-Vine, check it out. The first wine that I ever made, and this was at home in buckets, in glass carboys, was rosé of Grenache. And one of my coworkers at Pride Mountain Vineyard had Grenache vines in his backyard, and he was not using them for anything. So back in 2014, I actually made my first wine, rosé of Grenache, from backyard grapes, and it was delicious and really drinkable. So rosé of Grenache has always had a special place for me because of that. So currently, my favorite rosé of Grenache is from Territorium Wines. And this is a friend of mine, Jim Duane, who's a winemaker here in the Napa Valley. And he makes a killer rosé of Grenache. It's around the $28 price point. And it's actually from El Dorado, which is an area here in California that I feel like we're starting to hear more about, not just Napa and Sonoma, but there's other counties and regions and appellations and AVAs, translation wine areas here in California that are really growing some fantastic grapes and producing some great wines. So Jim makes his rosé of Grenache for Territorium Wines, and that is from El Dorado. Placer County, which is northeast of here, going towards Sacramento, and it's kind of between Sacramento and Reno, actually. So listen to Jim's tasting notes, winemaker tasting notes on this rosé of Grenache. It somehow walks a fine line of bright and crisp while still maintaining a juiciness of fruit flavors that leave your mouth watering. The dominant flavors in the wine are characterized by grapefruit, lemongrass, strawberry, and cucumber. Notes of watermelon, peach blossom, and lime can be found too. And the structure is driven by the crisp acidity and short, palate cleansing finish. This wine is meant to be enjoyed by itself, but can pair with lighter food just as well as a sunny patio and good friends. Dude, Jim, shout out. Beautiful tasting notes for a beautiful wine. So I'll put the link in the show notes. Just pale and bright and juicy and really refreshing, especially on a hot day. And then I have to give you a great value price. Under $20 is what I'm calling value. And this is a Grenache in the red form from Grenache's birthplace, right? We said that the origins of Grenache are in Spain. Tres Picos. It's about $15, and it is really a great wine for that price. I stumbled upon this years ago, and we sort of replenish on it every so often. We typically buy that from wine.com. And what really impressed me about this wine is that it's at such a great price point, yet many vintages have received great scores and ratings. 90 points, 92 points from things like Wine Enthusiast, Wine Spectator, James Suckling, who's a very well-known wine critic. So whenever you can find the cross-section of great ratings from people who know a lot about wine and then a $15 price point, it's like, I got to shout that out to all of you. So the notes for Tres Picos is very intense cherry red color with tones of purple. A great concentration of aromas of a ripe red fruit with floral nuances. In the mouth, it's a well-structured, rich wine that evokes tastes of blackberry, plum, tones of leather and vanilla, and silky, soft tannins. Hello. James Suckling says, a juicy and expressive garnacha with ripe plum and spiced cherries. Sappy and ripe with lots of tart cherry and strawberry, and a hint of coffee and vanilla in the medium long finish. By the way, in case you haven't listened to other episodes where I've broken this down, when we hear about hints of coffee and vanilla in a wine, that's generally coming from barrel aging and wines that have aged in oak barrels that are toasted on the inside. That's going to evoke those notes of coffee, vanilla. And always just a friendly reminder, whether we're talking about notes of berries or leather or lavender or plums, none of those things are actually in the wine. They're not added to the wine. That's the magic of wine, as I always call it, is the chemistry of all these compounds that are in there and created through fermentation and aging. They mirror and they remind us of aromas and flavors that we recognize from fruits and flowers and herbs. And that's just so cool, isn't it? I'll put the link in the show notes so you can find that and have it shipped. So whichever way you go until Solovato Grenache is released next year, highly recommend our fantastic friends and neighbors who are making these wines. T-Vine in Calistoga, Territorium in El Dorado, and Tres Picos in Spain. If you listened to our harvest episode a couple weeks back, or the one where I interviewed Travis Ramazzotti, then you're familiar with me talking about the Ramazzotti family and how they are our grape growers for the wines that we make. And they make a fantastic Grenache Noir, which is one of our favorite wines in their wine club. But at this time of recording, it's sold out. It's not available. It's a very small production, and it's usually just for the wine club. But I would be remiss if I did not shout out another beautiful Sonoma County Grenache. It's Ramazzotti. I'll put their website in the show notes, and check out their new tasting room in Geyserville, and maybe you can convince Travis and the team there to pour you a little bit of Grenache. Tell them Nikki sent you. I also find that red Grenache is a really great Thanksgiving wine. And I always get so many questions about what wine should be on the table for Thanksgiving. In fact, I probably should do a whole episode on that. Stay tuned. But, when we talk about food and wine pairing, Thanksgiving can be tricky because how many different things are on your Thanksgiving table? Besides the bird, think of all the different side dishes, vegetables, starches, sauces, herbs. There's a lot of flavors going on, which is what we love about Thanksgiving, right? How many flavors on one plate? So I find that Grenache, whether it's the tea vine, the Tres Picos, is a really great Thanksgiving wine because it's a crowd pleaser and super versatile and just kind of sits in the pocket with all those different cornucopias of flavors there. Cornucopia is like a Thanksgiving thing. See what I did there? Chateauneuf du Pape. It's really fun to say. So is cornucopia. I don't know where I'm pulling these words out of today. So there is your Grenache 101. Check out the link in the show notes for this episode, and you can find each of the Sip Spotlight wines, Tea Vine, Territorium, Ramazzotti, and Tres Picos, and enjoy drinking all of those until my delicious Solvato 2023 Grenache will be available next year. If you'd like to be an angel and support the podcast, buy me a glass of wine, probably Grenache. There's a link in the show notes to do that, and we would be ever so grateful. And finally, if you know someone who would enjoy joining this party, share the podcast, spread the word. There's plenty of room at this table. And as always, until next time, sip well.